Hi, folks. This is Tricia Friedman. Thank you for tuning in to the show. This week, we've got something a little bit different from you. We've had a lot of listener feedback requesting this, actually, so thank you for that. That when I'm guesting on another show, or when Jeff is guesting on another show, that we point you to those episodes as well. And so it was my absolute pleasure to be a guest on the newish podcast that's entitled Women Talking Bout AI. So this week, you'll get to hear that full conversation. Before I dig into it, I want to remind you that at Shifting Schools, you may be familiar with our annual tradition that at the start of a new calendar year, we give you a new free guide that aims to help teams level up on all things facilitation and collaboration. The 2025 free guide is available now, so if you head over to the show notes, you can get the link to grab your free guide now. As always, Jeff and I would love your feedback on that guide, as well as hearing from you any requests you have for any other upcoming guides you'd like us to get to work on. Okay, with that, here I am guesting on the show, Women Talking Bout AI. If you like Shifting Schools, that show might be one that you also want to tune into. We'd love to hear your thoughts also on other things you'd like to see the Shifting Schools podcast do in 2025. If you've got thoughts, our email address is in the show notes. Thanks again.
In a time where artificial intelligence is totally reshaping education or has the potential to, how do we maintain authentic human connections while we harness AI's potential? Today on Women Talking About AI, join me for a conversation with Tricia Friedman, an international educator and self-described neuroqueer futurist who brings a uniquely human perspective to AI literacy. From creating personalized AI companions to reimagining educational assessment, Tricia challenges us to look beyond the productivity-focused marketing of AI tools and explore how this technology can really deepen our understanding of ourselves and others. Enjoy. Welcome to Women Talking About AI, everyone. I'm Kimberly Becker, and today we are exploring the intersection of AI literacy, creativity, and inclusive education with Tricia Friedman. She's the founder of allied.org and is the creative content director at shiftingschools.com. She's a podcaster and an all-around educational innovator. I'm really interested in her very future-forward and inclusive work in AI literacy and community building. And I know that today we can learn about her unique perspective on harnessing AI while still maintaining that authentic human connection, especially in education. So there is a lot more to say about her background, but I'm going to let her tell that story. So welcome to the show, Tricia.
It's a huge honor. I'm a big fan of the show. And if you'll bear with me for a minute, I actually have like a list of a few things that, it's your first season. So I thought maybe it's good reflection for you to know some of the things that have stood out to your listeners. I love actually.
Well, thank you.
I love that the show, of course, is about women talking about AI, but you're also often pointing to some of your influences. I love that the two of you had a conversation about Gia Tolentino's work, who I love her as an author. She did a piece this year about Cocomelon and SEO and algorithms and how they're changing children's media. You had Dr. Anna Mills on, and you kind of talked a lot about how social media for this moment that we're in has been really useful. I mean, certainly that's how I discovered your show. I think that's how I ended up in this position right now, having a conversation with you. So social media for learning and networking has been great. You had a really great episode talking about digital twins and the possibilities. And I have to say, like, that meant a lot to me because I've actually built an AI digital twin of someone. And I really appreciate you left space in that conversation for it's messy, right? There's going to be some good use cases, and then there's going to be some things that we don't want to do with that technology. So I super duper appreciate y'all really leaning into that gray and acknowledging over and over again the stories being written right now. We don't have all the answers, but we can find them if we, kind of come together and listen to each other. So thank you so much for the work that you've been doing with the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Wow, that is so validating to hear you kind of give us a little recap of what was helpful for you because we don't know. And as like business owners and business partners, we often joke like we have no idea what people really want. We think we know. We know what we want, but we have no clue. And we're always surprised at what stands out and what kind of lands with people in good and bad ways. And I'm sure that's been your experience too. I wanna so before we get, like, down into the AI education world, like, I wanna hear more about you because we don't really know each other except through LinkedIn. Um, what can you kind of walk us through, like, a mini bio of your 20 years as an educator and I think 9 different countries? Is that right?
So I'm originally from the great state of New Jersey. And the majority of my career has been actually in international education in the K-12 space. So I've worked in China, Thailand. Then I took kind of a mid-career, a little bit of a break, but not really. I was in Peace Corps in Morocco, then Ukraine, where I met my wife. Together, we then moved to Indonesia, then Switzerland, then Singapore, and my wife is Canadian. So now we're here in Canada. So it's been interesting actually working in education in so many different contexts and seeing where, of course, the local, context, culture has a huge influence. But international schools are also an amalgamation of students from everywhere in the world. And so I think I come at AI or education from this standpoint of there are some universal truths to the educational experience. There are some universal truths to the way that technology influences behavior. And I think for sure right now, many of us are in this same place of things are changing quickly. And while simultaneously that's hard, K-12 education needs very much to be shaken up. I appreciate, I know you've addressed on the show before that K-12 in some regards is in a trickier spot. If you're in higher ed, you have more autonomy. A lot of K-12 is really tethered to standardized testing. We have a teacher shortage crisis that, is growing. We have a mental health crisis. So it's a tough spot to be in. But with that, I would say is an opportunity for K-12 and higher ed to bridge,
Mhm.
and to be learning from one another. And I almost feel like AI is the nudge that's getting us to see some of that where we should have maybe had a better bridge all along.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I was at a actually, back when we were caucusing in Iowa, I was at a caucus and, the caucusing's really interesting. I don't know if you've ever read about it or seen any videos of it. I'm not an Iowa native, but I do love the Iowa caucuses. It's such a glimpse into anyway, I'm gonna get to a point about schools here.
I
And I
believe
was
you.
sitting okay. I was sitting at a table, and there's a lot of, like, waiting around, and it's actually really informal, like, you just write your vote on a sheet of paper, and then a Girl Scout comes by, and you put it in a Ziploc bag. This blew my mind. Anyway, a guy at the table, we were kind of getting to know each other, happened to be my son's technology teacher in 8th grade, and I asked him well, I introduced myself, and I said, "I'm so fascinated by AI. Are you teaching it? Are you" he had a very strong reaction. He was like, "I don't know how I'm expected to do anything extra given these standards that I have to teach to. There is no room in my curriculum for one more thing. It's not possible." And, I was really shocked because I could tell that he really wanted to be involved in, like, this cutting edge tech but he can't. He's constrained by the requirements imposed on him, and that's not the case in higher ed, although I don't think academic freedom means as free as people want it to be, but yeah, it is definitely more constrained in the K-12 space.
And, we're not quite in a post-COVID world, but I think at this point that we're at with COVID, the emotional needs of families are just so drastically, drastically different. And so I think that's the other component is that if you're in K-12, you are asked sort of to be a pseudo caretaker in a way that
Mhm.
you necessarily weren't asked, 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Mhm.
The, emotional regulation, I think, has to come first. Maybe could have been a little bit more of a priority in years past, but I think that has also really changed the nature of the job. And we've just been through a big change crisis. So I think also people have change fatigue.
Mhm.
That's really tough. And in the United States, I think my international experience has taught me of what it means to be in a society where K-12 educators are really appreciated, respected, treated as professionals. And my experience in North America is that's not true to the same extent. So you also have that as another mitigating factor, just sort of the um, disapproval of public education
Mhm.
is really, really tough. So I know that you both have had a lot of empathy for K-12 and thank you for that because I don't think it always gets that and it really, really needs it right now.
Yeah, we don't I mean, neither of us have. I taught high school for 2 years, in the Teach for America program, and it did not go well for me. I promptly left after my 2 years were up, and probably for mental health reasons should have left before, but it was that's a very extreme situation, but yeah, it's my husband is also a high school teacher, and, um, I actually went to his school and did an AI literacy kind of professional develop workshop because they don't nobody is talking to them about AI. Um, they were blown away.
Yeah, we have a huge spectrum of schools that are getting access to the learning, that are given the time, that also, uh, there's a little bit of, watching for because the other thing we see is lots of folks all of a sudden overnight are AI experts,
Yes.
right? And so the quality and, the thoughtfulness of training, if that's happening, it's all over the place. And I think if you're watching which states are coming out with different guidance, there's some variety there. And even though we can't bank on the average family getting the same level of care and treatment, we know that kids are using this technology. We know that this technology has always been or has been a part of their lives, with streaming services for a long time. And when you have conversations with teens or preteens about the ways in which they're engaging AI, it should be worrisome that we're not doing a better job of upskilling teachers. But again, you and I kind of outlined there's multiple crises right now that are at play. And so this is a piece where education needs to be better funded. And I think we're going to see what it will mean to once again have sort of this technical equity issue of kids and families, parents and caretakers understanding the real positive use cases, but then, of course, also the dangers. Yeah.
Yeah. What's top of mind for you when you in your consulting business? So what's top of mind for you when you begin to interact with the school? What does that look like? Where do you start? And I should say, someone called me out on LinkedIn because we often throw around this term AI, and typically what I'm talking about is generative AI. I'm a linguist, and so that's my connection to it. And you pointed out lots of people are popping up as AI experts. I am no expert. I'm not a computer scientist. I do not position myself as an expert. I usually like the word enthusiast. Um, I have Jessica and I have been obsessed. We've talked about that before on this podcast. When ChatGPT came out, neither of us slept. We were texting each other at 3 a.m. It was ridiculous. But yeah, so when you go into a school or when you get in front of a group of people, where do you start?
Well, I kind of want to touch on what you just said about the expertise and not being a computer scientist. I am not a computer scientist either, but something I appreciate that Dr. Timnit Gebru talks a lot about is that in this new era of generative AI, We actually really need folks with humanities backgrounds. We need folks with backgrounds that are not necessarily what we would think of when we think technical expertise. And my advice to any school district or anybody who's thinking about bringing someone in to talk about AI literacy for educators is this person an expert in pedagogy? Are they an educator with real flourish? Because I am more interested right now in, it's not about the tools per se, but it really is about the strategies, the applications of this technology that actually mean something for learning. I feel like when we're talking about a tool like ChatGPT, it wasn't built for education. It has applications, right? But I think if you even look at the marketing language or rhetoric around it, so much of it is about productivity. You can write 10,000 LinkedIn posts in seconds. Nobody wants that. So I think you want to bring in somebody who really understands what's going to help shape problem solvers. In what ways do we need to reimagine assessment? How is this, of course, linked to DEIJ? This is, I say again and again, this is a moment where the literacies cannot be in silos. We really need to be looking at how they're all knotted and interwoven. And so that's very, very important to me. To answer your actual question, I always start with trying to get a better sense of where are folks at in your community, understanding that there's not necessarily like an average, but are people already exploring with it? Who are some of the folks in your community that have been experimental? Because I really think that valuing the expertise and building on it, it's showing that respect to the community first and foremost. So top of mind is like, where are the successes? Where are some of the areas where people are very afraid of the technology? When I talk about the interwoven nature of literacies, emotional literacy is one of them. I do think that some educators, and I think this is true in higher ed and K-12, there's like a grieving process that some folks have to go through. If you really loved, I don't know who these people are, but if you really love teaching the timed trial essay, it's dying. It's maybe already been dead, but folks maybe haven't had the time and space to grieve it, say goodbye to it, and also be shown, is there something more generative on the other side of that? That's the conversation piece that I think if you come in hot with these are the top 3 tools, I just think people are tired of that. It's not effective. But if you're able to come in and talk about how might this shift the learning experience in a way that is going to be different and acknowledge difference hard, but in a way that actually, ironically, might feel more human, is going to build on the relationships that exist within a school that remembers what's the point of school? Like, if you ask a 13-year-old or an 8-year-old, why do you go to school? 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, because that's where my friends are. And I know that sounds maybe like, I don't know, a little bit cheesy, but relationships, people coming together, this is how innovation happens. So even if you want to like look at the business case, even if you want to talk about open AI, that was a collaboration. Any great problem that's ever been solved, it's people coming together. So how are we, again, just letting students enjoy that and come to that in a way that is meaningful? I think that's where some of the better use cases for any educational technology are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My co-host Jessica Parker will often say, like, where's the problem? Where's the human problem? She's not able to be here today, but when we first started working together, we would say things like, we never let the technology lead the conversation. We are not trying to use tech for the sake of tech. And there is a huge animosity among educators. And I don't know to what extent this is true about the K-12 space, but in higher ed, there's this huge animosity between educators and ed tech. or faculty in ed tech. And do you see that same, like you were talking about fear, but I think underlying animosity, when we know this from being somewhat emotionally literate, underlying most anger, angst, animosity is some sort of a fear. Um, do you see that in the K-12 space where people are pushing back because they feel it's being marketed to them? It's just another ed tech tool, just another big tech, ed tech. It's like, it's really gotten a bad name. And I didn't know that until I accidentally started a tech company, which is bizarre, but yeah, I had no idea. And then people associated me with big tech, ed tech, and I was like, "What? No, I'm just what?" You see that in K-12 too?
Oh, it's a huge
Yeah.
issue in K-12, and I think there's a few different reasons for it, or a few different potential reasons that it's ended up there. And something I really appreciate about y'all on the podcast is explaining where you've made some of those business choices with Moxie, where intentionally you've said, let's keep the tension. We believe in it.
Mhm.
It might initially be a better business decision, but we're not going to do that because that's rare, I think, with ed tech companies. And I think if you're a teacher today, you have been through the experience of money being invested in some technology that didn't solve a problem. It might have even created more problems. You know, I think about the smart boards. Lots of money was spent on smart boards. It didn't solve a problem. It created problems. And I think, again, because your average K-12 teacher is really doing the job of three people at once,
Mhm.
it's sort of like, please don't make problems where we didn't need one. And if, we have money or we have resources, please can we be more thoughtful in the investment of it? I think a lot of schools are getting better at that. And, like there have been ed tech companies that, of course, initially a tool will be free and then everybody gets on board and then all of a sudden it's super expensive. And public education just does not have a ton of money. So I think that also has felt a little bit bad faith. There are other organizations that have done a great job of making things free specifically for educators, and that's mattered. And then there's also different organizations where, sure, like there's an educator behind that product, and you really notice a difference between like I've had that classroom experience and I know what some of the needs of students are versus we're just going to create something super shiny and flashy. So that animosity for sure is there. And as I mentioned, I also just think we're in such a space of change fatigue. Futurist Amy Webb talks about this time as being, a hyper cycle of change. And she talks about thinking that, we're going to look back at this time and we're not going to be thinking about millennial versus Gen X versus Gen Z. We're kind of all going to be Gen T. And that's T standing for transformation. That our collective generations are going through the greatest period of change altogether. And I think a lot about that, and how true that might end up being.
Mhm. Yeah, well, speaking of, futurists, you describe yourself as a neuroqueer futurist. Tell me about that label and how that applies to your work.
Yeah, so I am both queer and autistic, and I'm very interested in futures literacy. Futures literacy is, basically the work of being very, very aware of signals of things that are happening today that are sort of like clues or hints at what might come. But that is not to say that you're disinterested in the past. I think a futurist will tell you in order to think about a 10-year horizon, you also really need to be hyper aware of what's happened almost 20 years previous in any different industry. But it's also work that's very social, that also prioritizes the imagination. Futurists often talk about you have to be able to think the unthinkable and be willing to look at multiple different futures. And that's work that you can use AI to assist you with, but it's also uniquely human. I have to be paying attention to my world. I'm thinking a lot too, though, about how my autism and my queerness are real assets. AI is a predictive technology. And so I think in some ways, predictive writing, we're already seeing where people are really worried, like, oh no, does my writing feel or sound generic or average? And I sort of think, again, this is going to be a time where we're really going to value creativity. I know a lot of folks are very worried about, creativity and creative thinking skills being corroded, but I actually think for the first time, we're going to start to think about how absolutely essential they are. Um, and I'm thinking, as your co-host mentions, like, where's the problem?
Mhm.
There's a wonderful book by Shannon Valor called The AI Mirror. And again, she outlines the many different crises that we're facing in the world right now, and that we really need to have uniquely different approaches to problem solving with technology. And I kind of feel like, as an autistic queer person, I am used to approaching things kind of differently, right? And realizing that sometimes the status quo is maybe not the best approach. So that's where some of the work that I do with AI is quirky, is different, but I think that's where we find the edges of use cases. I think Professor Ethan Mollick, who I know you're a fan of, talks all the time about, if you're saying that generative AI tools can't do something, is it that the tool can't do it, or you haven't tried in the way that's going to nudge it to be able to do that for you?
Mhm.
And again, I think when I look back at some of the experimentation I've done, that's the thing that I hear back from people is like, that's really interesting. I would not have thought about doing it in that way. And that's where I talk a lot about how we have to talk and we have to analyze the marketing of these tools. Like,
Yes.
really look at how they're branding themselves. And this is where it's like the productivity stuff, nobody cares. Nobody wants 1,000 more LinkedIn posts. Nobody wants 1,000, AI generated food pictures on Facebook. Like, these things are not useful. But let's talk about, I love the work that earthspecies.org is doing. I don't know if you're familiar with them or not. Okay, can I ramble about them for a moment? Earth
Absolutely. Ramble, please.
Okay. This has been, I love, love, love digging into earthspecies.org is essentially using the power of AI to decode interspecies communication. So, that's everything
Oh,
from bats to dogs, and if you if you dig into, like, the nitty-gritty of some of the debates that scientists are having, you have some folks saying, "Hey, this is gonna be like when we landed on the moon, and then we had folks really caring about planet Earth because they saw it from afar, and it gave us a different perspective on what it means to take care of our home." Some scientists are saying, when we can better understand animals, we might move away from factory farming. We might totally have more people going vegetarian, and that might help the environment. And then, of course, there's other scientists who are saying, but what if we get it wrong? What if we completely disrupt whale migration? Like, every time I hear the news about, like, a whale or a dolphin, like, attacking a yacht, I'm like, is that what's happening? It's like half laughing, but hey, maybe. But, again, I think this is a really interesting use case of, we're not quite sure where this technology might take us. And it's, I think, really, really intriguing to look both at the, what if it all goes right? What if it all goes wrong? But this is one that I think points us towards, when people say AI is technology that is going to change us like no other technology, this is one of the use cases that I think is really interesting to talk about with students.
yes. Yes, okay. This is a great rabbit hole to go down because also, I'm a linguist and I'm also an animal lover and I'm fascinated by and I'm totally blanking and I tried to quick Google it, but I don't want to spend time doing that. We'll put it in the show notes. I recently posted on LinkedIn an article about bird language and it just really brought together a lot of things that I love, animals, birds, specifically AI and language. And, you know, when you go way back, way, way back, anthropologically, I mean, language is a tool. Language was kind of a technology of sorts that developed, it was, and of course it continues to evolve, and I see this as another evolution, and I do not like the positioning of it as a revolution, because I think that's too stark, and I would rather just see it as a process of, we are evolving to use this technology as part of our communication practices. And there's a theory of post-digital, um, of a post-digital world, basically. A researcher named Knox came out with it in 2019, which was pre-COVID, and I think now it's more true than ever. But that technology is really just an extension of us. It's not. We're sort of not. We're in the middle of it, and it's part of us, and it's, yeah. So yeah, I love that. I love that idea. And my husband teaches biology, and he often focuses on climate change, climate, effects of all of that, and they look at a lot of news stories, and the story, a lot of things you said, I'm just like, oh, I, so many rabbit holes. Okay, I digress.
Well, I just
Um,
wanna recommend one other
yeah,
book to you then,
mhm,
because I think I completely agree with you. I think this is a part of an evolution. Technology has also been a part of that story.
mhm,
Dr. Kate Darling has a great book called The New Breed, where the analogy that she uses is that we should be thinking about AI the same way we've always thought about our companion animals. And she goes into the history. I'm also an animal lover, but I didn't realize in World War II, a lot of Americans were asked, like, will you donate your dog to go and fight? Yeah, it's like remarkable. Like, and it also goes into the, current military use of animal species. I had no idea. But she talks a lot about how animals have always assisted us in our progress. Dogs, horses, like the human species would not be in the place that they are
mhm,
without that help. And that the same is going to be true of our relationship with AI. It's going to help augment our capacities. It's going to, enable us to do things that we could not do before. And I think the argument that she puts forward in her book is really great. And I do think that metaphors like that are really useful for us opening up the conversation, because I think for sure the media is either trying to just really create this binary divide of you're either for AI or you're against it. And I just sort of think like it's a false dichotomy, like nobody that I know is either like pro phones or, I mean, I guess some people are like fully against them, but, like I have a love hate relationship with my smartphone. I have a love hate relationship with my dishwasher. So I kind of just think like those gray spaces are where,
yeah,
the better conversations can really flourish. And I do think though, like when we think about, oh, right. Like, there's been so many different aspects to human flourishing that have only been possible by bringing in the intelligence of something else. And I feel
yeah,
like I am only the person I am because my wife and I have a dog. And I feel like my dog has taught me about love dogs. Like they do teach us how to live better lives. I truly believe that. Like dog intelligence is an asset to human intelligence.
mhm, absolutely, yeah. It all in human intelligences, not just the traditional, but especially the emotional intelligence. Um, so many things. I want to go back to something you said about marketing and how AI is being marketed, especially in educational sectors. My concern, Jessica and I have a huge shared concern of this idea of speed and productivity and becoming superhuman and doing everything faster and better, and um not just because learning requires friction, but also because the the purpose of, I mean, we work primarily with researchers and graduate students, and they're, they're often coming to us because they have a deliverable product that is due. And so that's their goal in that moment, is to get that product done. But what I like to remind people is, like, the goal overall is not to finish this paper. The goal for someone in a research setting is to become an expert. Graduate students, that is their job. They are becoming experts. They're not just finishing that lit review or, finalizing that thesis. That's really important step along the way, but the goal is to become an expert. And you have to have slow, friction-filled processes to get you to that point. And so, yeah, my concern, and I think that's why when people use an AI tool, they're often disappointed because you're watching anything on TV and there's Gemini ads, for example, and the whole underlying message is fast productivity. It's all about and then people are using it and they're getting one response and they're like, I mean, that's not really what I was looking for because they're accustomed to using rule based systems and software programs and internet searches and things that have keywords that are designed to get you one, or the best right answer. And AI doesn't work that way. So we have to shift our thinking from this like rule based software paradigm to a more machine learning paradigm where we are prompting and then reprompting and iterating on that so that we are negotiating the meaning that we get. And that is something that you can't, I mean, the tech is there and it's ready, but it's user behavior training. And that's often where we get stuck, especially, I mean, at Moxie, that's often where we get stuck and why we provide so many webinars and other types of recorded tutorials because it's not, I don't think it's human nature because we're in this software paradigm. We have been. Put in the answer, put in the question, get an answer. It doesn't work that way with AI.
No, and I think it's also where we're going to have to really dig in and have the hard conversation about what's the point of learning? What's the role of assessment? Has the role of assessment in K-12 been built to purpose for a different time? What's the purpose of school? What actually is human intelligence? And I know, these things are big philosophical questions, but I don't know that we've had I don't know, the impetus to really dig in and answer it. And this is where I think, when AI is suggesting a certain value or suggesting a certain mode of success, it's getting us maybe to that place of like slowing down, having the conversation.
Mhm.
I know that you and your co-host have co-authored a research paper on, using LLMs for interview questions.
Mhm.
And I think when I reflect on that paper, I think part of what you're getting at is that research interview process is so critical, so important if we want people to answer honestly and authentically. The craft of the question matters. And so when
Mhm.
I see that merger of LLM and interview questions, this is where it's sort of like, can we flourish our human curiosity? Can we get better at the art of conversation? And this is where I have a huge free collection of different prompt templates, and I have one that's all about setting yourself up to have role play scenarios with an LLM like ChatGPT. One of them very much is like from my perspective of someone who's neurodivergent, who often goes into a conversation or, I really don't like small talk. So I have some anxiety around that. But how can I use this tool actually to rehearse a no stakes really conversation
Mhm.
and in a way have a running script that lets me see myself as a conversationalist totally differently, right? Like to me, this is an important problem to solve for everyone. There's lots of research about just how poor we are at listening. And I think, again, this is potentially a way for us to look at, well, how can we rehearse it in different ways that the stakes don't feel so high so that we can finally come to terms with that?
Yeah, yeah. So much of what you said there is like been in the background of my mind as a motivation for how we use AI because my whole career prior to um, leaving academia, um, just a year and a half ago or something, was language teaching and in many different scenarios, native and non native speakers and all different levels. And yeah, one of the things that we know from linguistic research is that you may ask a question and it's like an iceberg. And under the surface, there are all these implied questions that are really can be biased, can be leading, can be wonderful, can be the real crux of what you're getting at, but they're just implied. I mean, we have a name for this in linguistics. It's a huge part of our conversational nature. One of the things LLMs are not good at is because they're trained on written data, and we know from linguistic research, oral and written language has different feature, literally different lexical vocabulary and grammatical features that it's if you try to ask it to have a conversation, it sounds very stilted. It's not very good at it. I'm sure it'll get better, but that's something that I think that critical look at exactly what you said. And earlier you said something about there are signals and you like to find the signal. And it reminds me of that adage of finding the signal in the noise. And we wrote a textbook chapter recently, and that was the title of the chapter, is finding the signal in all the noise about AI and looking for the pieces that can really, again, solve the human problem that you're having rather than just trying to stick technology in as a puzzle piece. It doesn't fit. It has to be carved specifically in that context or setting that you're working in.
Yeah, and Dr. Becker, I would say, like, even with that issue of feeling like the chatbot is not getting the context or is not, aware of the human experience in the way that it needs to in order to have the conversation you want. It's an interesting problem to try to solve. And this is where I'm very interested in AI for so-called identity play. I don't know if you know the work
Mhm.
of, she's a computer scientist and a musician, Holly Herndon. So what she did is she's basically created a database of her voice, of her music, and has said anybody that wants to use it to create their own music, go for it. She's created music of her own database. It's like Holly Herndon, listen to her stuff. It's like, again, when we talk about how there's going to be new types of creativity because of this technology, she's often top of mind. But, she's what sort of inspired me to create the first AI digital twin that I worked on. And this is a fellow educator, longtime school leader named Kathleen Nagley. I co-host a separate podcast with her called Unhinged Collaboration.
Hmm.
Kathleen was a very successful head of school in Helsinki, Finland. She's that person at a K-12 educational conference where, like, there's a lineup of people that just wanna talk to her because her mentorship has mattered so much. And, so I had said to her about a year ago, "How do you feel about me trying to, like, kinda clone you and clone your voice?" And she was like, "Go for it." And I was like, "Here's all the things that I'll do to make sure it's safe and, like, let's experiment with this." We've had I call it Catbot, and in getting it to sound more like Kathleen, we really had to play a lot with the knowledge base. And what I was noticing in the testing, I set it up so that people that we trusted and approved could have a real-time phone conversation with her. And in the early testing, what Catbot would start to do was directly just mimic what you had said back. And I'm like, "What is going on here?" And then I realized part of the, value system that I had designed for Catbot was that she had been a proponent of cognitive coaching. Cognitive coaching is a big believer in paraphrasing. The chatbot was taking that to literally mean, "I'm just gonna parrot back." But through that whole, like, learning, I really got thinking about, is that kind of how people experience paraphrasing? Like, is it the huge, great thing to do that so many people say? And it was like, again, in solving that problem or working on that, it really got me thinking again about the art of conversation, about how different things that are a part of our biography show up or not, or could be interpreted differently. And so I think even in that act of what does it mean for me to sound like myself? AI is a technology for us to learn about ourselves in profoundly new, different ways, which I would argue this is so much more important than the productivity use case. So when I'm talking to teens, it's also what are some of the ways that you're going to be able to understand yourself, your context with this, that are much more interesting than that timed trial written essay. And again, I think that's where, we talk about tension with learning. People are willing to stick with that tension if the learning feels meaningful or important or relevant. And I think that's the other thing right now that's really hard. Like that stuff that's not relevant.
Mhm.
Of course, I would rather just ask ChatGPT to do it. I wish I could have done that for a lot of my quote unquote homework. So I almost appreciate, I know this is a spicy take, but I almost appreciate that this technology is saying that totally pointless, meaningless assignment, no, it has no place in schools anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, as a person who has taught freshman comp for a number of years, I cannot tell you how many times I've been asked that question, when are we ever gonna use this? And so, obviously you use certain pieces of it. You need to be able to get to your point and write a thesis statement, but the 5-paragraph essay just really needs to die. I'm sorry.
And
Oh
and the, and the
god.
thing is, like, like with death and the life cycle, it's like I think it's like there's a version of that
Mhm.
that is going to be meaningful to students. That's
Mhm.
probably going to be multimedia,
Mhm, yes.
right? Like it's not it dies and then like you know,
Yeah.
like there's something better on the
Mhm.
horizon. I think that's the conversation that we need to
Mhm.
start inviting folks towards. Like, what's the next version of it?
Yes. Yeah, like electronic rhetoric. I mean, there's written rhetoric, there's visual, there's oral, and there's electronic, and yeah, there's so we at the end of my career when I was teaching some freshman comp, I allowed them to their deliverable could be anything, could be a podcast, could be a video essay, could be in any mode, and they loved that, and it's so much more useful to be able to make an infographic or a video, the skill that that can take into the workforce, and just what it does in the mind, is really so much better than just forcing everybody to, you know, use this outdated assignment type. But yeah, it's gonna take time, and I think people get very they hear this, they probably agree with us, lots of people agree. Yeah, the 5-paragraph essay needs to die, and we need alternatives, but they don't know what those alternatives
Right.
are, and they are grasping, and they think they need to do it right now, and Jessica and I will often say, "Just baby step it. Just change one little thing, one little aspect of an assignment, not a whole assignment. Just baby step your way into it because the brain is not going to react well if emotionally and cognitively anytime you try to disrupt a system, it's going to be harder if you don't not micromanage, but micro step your way into that change.
Oh, 100%. And I think that's the thing. A lot of people feel like this pressure to like just truly transform everything overnight. It's not possible. We can't do it.
Mhm.
And I think sustainable change is change that's been built incrementally. And we've got like a little bit to take from the natural world with that, right? Like seasons often, well, healthy seasons when the world was healthy, like we saw the gradual shift. Adrienne Marie Brown's work is really important to me, and she talks a lot about how, the caterpillar doesn't know that it's going to become the butterfly, but also, again, cheesy apology, that in between period, right? Like
Mhm.
you need that in between period. And so, yes, I love the idea of you don't have to change everything that you're doing, but where's some room for you to experiment? Just have a teeny tiny little experiment
Mhm.
and to be willing to have it not go so well. I think this is the other
Yeah.
part, right? Like it's not always going to be a hugely successful, championship victory. Like, this is true of all innovation. So I think that part is really important too.
Yeah, the failure tolerance. Mhm. Yeah, I mean, and we talk about that failure tolerance and ambiguity tolerance. And that's actually what makes someone, I mean, we know this from applied linguistics research, a good language learner. When you can tolerate a little ambiguity and you can sort of, and again, predict what's coming and what's likely to be the case based on the context, then you're always going to be a better language learner. And argue, and this is not a new argument or one that I came up with, that all learning is language learning to some extent, because the way we have to evidence our learning is going to happen through language, whether it's written or oral, whether it's reading or listening, it doesn't matter, productive, receptive, it happens through language, the technology of language. And so that's why I think so much of my background as a language teacher has been relevant in a lot of different contexts I found.
And I think this is where that idea of folks that have that humanities background are at somewhat of an advantage with this technology.
Mhm.
I don't know if you would agree with this, Dr. Becker, but I'm thinking about language as a technology tool. Its application is for relationship building, right? It's for connecting with people. And this is where I think there's a great way to apply that advice of going for incremental change.
Mm.
I think so often when there's a big new flashy tech tool, it's often positioned as like, this is going to change the world. And I think like, okay, let's just like turn the telescope around. This new technology that we have, I want you to pick one person you care about. What's something that you can do with this for that one person for one use case? And the story that I tell very often around this is earlier in the year, my father was diagnosed with cancer. He's okay. He's cancer free now. But initially, when he was getting ready for treatment, he was very nervous. He's in New Jersey. I'm in Ottawa. That distance is hard when you have a loved one who's ill. And so I designed him a bespoke chatbot, and the chatbot was trained on all of the current research around his treatment program. But most importantly, my father and my mom love the show Veep, the comedy show Veep. So I designed it that the chatbot was Dr. Selena, like based on the character Selena Myers. So every time she was going to be giving him advice or just talking to him about his treatment, it was a moment of levity, of humor, of comedy. But the real point of the tool was it gave my dad and I something to chat about during that time because he would talk to me about how he used her and I would maybe make changes in his progress, and we laughed.
Mhm.
And honestly, it was like a gift for me to have the AI literacy to be able to build that. And it also started some great conversations around when and where you should not just be using a chatbot for medical advice, of course, right? But I think I was so driven to work on it. My parents got more curious about what this technology is. So I also think it's sort of can we bring the technology back to the very personal level? I think that's where a lot of the learning is going to be at too, initially for people. And also where it might help some people get past that fear factor
Mhm.
when you position it as a tool that can be useful for your relationships and you get curious about those applications. I think that's where some people might be willing to just nudge the door open a little bit further.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is fascinating, and I don't want to end the conversation, but I want to be aware of your time. Um, One thing before I ask you for a recap or to say anything that you didn't get to say is, have you seen The Wild Robot?
Not
Not
yet, but
yet.
I really want to. Is it amazing?
I loved it.
Okay.
I have a kid who just went off to college, so it was very emotional for me. Yeah. But I also identified with the robot, becoming a mother and saying, "I absolutely was not programmed for this." That's, like, the best line because that's exactly what I thought, and then just the basic premise of it was originally a children's book and now a movie, is that you need the technology and the natural world and they work together. And something you said earlier, and we went down a rabbit hole and I didn't get the chance to say this, but something you said earlier really reminded me. It was something about learning from nature, looking at the seasons, and that's kind of what happens in that book and that story and movie is that she can't function, the robot can't function on her own. She needs the natural world, and then she helps the natural world too. So it's a symbiotic
Mm.
relationship.
Oh, I cannot wait to see it.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
really cute. Okay, so was there anything that you wanted to say that you didn't get that I didn't ask about or that you didn't get to talk about? Anything you wanna plug that you're doing, working on?
Oh goodness. Well, I currently am working on I'm going to be sharing a lot more about companion AI. And so the free guide that I mentioned that is meant to help educators kind of help students really be critical of different AI marketing. I'm very interested in some of the AI powered toys. There's a whole realm of these geared specifically at younger learners, and many of them market themselves as like your kid's ultimate best friend. And I think, again, just in the way that AI is gonna shift what we talk about when we talk about intelligence, it's already shifting what we talk about when we talk about companionship. Um, I know on the show before I think I've heard you bring up Replica. Replica's got a really interesting story. Listeners, if you're not familiar with it, I'd really recommend you check out it's an award-winning podcast series called Bot Love. The co-hosts it was a 6-year deep dive into, investigating different folks who they have very real, meaningful relationships with an AI companion. And prior to listening to that show, I would have felt like so judgmental of that, but they do a really good job of explaining how for some people, like, it is a lifeline. I had the great fortune of getting to interview Anna Oakes, who's a co-producer and a co-host, and we talked a lot about, like, yeah, like, it's technology that's super gray. Like, there are some use cases that if you listen to that show, it's gonna make you cry. And then there's other use cases where, of course, we should be super concerned about this. So I have a series that's coming out that's gonna be looking at companion AI, the marketing of these toys, and then what they actually do, because I think this is a conversation that's not on the radar of parents and caregivers yet, but really needs to be. I think about my own childhood. I really wanted a Teddy Ruxpin and, like, really wanted one, didn't get one. Clearly, I'm not over it yet. Um, but, some of the connections that I felt to my toys.
Mm.
But what if it's a toy that is designed to really keep my attention? What if I grew up with a toy that was designed to never disagree with me? What kind of friend would I be to others if, like, that's how I measured successful friendship? Like, there's a lot to get into there. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think companion AI is really something that's gonna there's a few toys now, the market's expected to boom, and I think we need to have, um more conversations about that. Just, really just exploring. There might be some use cases where someone's experienced extreme trauma and this is a bridge, but there might be an over reliance where we are taught that, hey, what you want from a friend is somebody that just always reaffirms your worldview. And I don't think that's a world that many of us want.
No, no, and I have the same concerns, on a much more professional level about the agreement that happens just in general with an AI. I've often described them as like a codependent eager beaver. They're really eager to please and eager to make connections that maybe aren't there because you hinted again, coming back to this idea that there's always an implication underneath the actual word that or phrase that is said. We don't often dig that deep, but the AI is picking up on that because it's just a predictive algorithm. It's just a communicative, um, yeah, it's just a like a mathematical communication model. And so it's gonna pick up on things that we don't even realize are there. Um,
Well, that's where I mean, if I'm gonna plug any other thing, I've been working recently on some folks aren't aware, Spotify Wrapped just happened. People are sharing their LinkedIn Wrapped. This was
yeah.
a year past, but these platforms also give you access to your lifetime data.
Mm,
So I recently went through the process of downloading my lifetime Spotify data that goes back to 2014, my Goodreads data. I'm an avid reader, so it's really interesting for me to look into that. And I have a bot that I have programmed to both understand like um, algorithmic um, literacy and how different marketers will use this data. And then I've also given it my lifetime Spotify data, and I've had it help me better understand to what extent an algorithm is much more responsible for my taste now. Like, where have been shifts? And like Dr. Becker, I would love to tell you that like I have been immune to it, that my personal musical taste is just mine. But no, like from the beginning in 2014 till now, the diversity of artists that I listen to, that's declined. The extent to which, like homogeneously successful artists are dominating my listening today, it's happened. Like, I really very much, my listening has been shaped and honed by that. Um, it also does a really good job of helping me understand, well, taking this data, what are some of the things that you would try to sell to me and what strategies? And it's like right on the mark. The usefulness of that now is now if I'm on social media and I'm scrolling and I see the ad that it's like, yeah, this is what I would try to sell to you. And I see it, I'm like, I know what you're doing. And I just feel a little bit more savvy about it. And so I think learning how we can be more aware of the roles that algorithms play in our life is really going to be increasingly important. It's a great conversation to have, but also understanding that we could shape it. There is actually something called a bridging algorithm that is not the default of social media. Instead of the one that we currently have on, like X, where if I say something, the algorithm is really designed to keep me there through my outrage and fear. So it's going to show me a lot of other stuff. But people actually have designed algorithms that could help you understand a different perspective, be more aware of yours. And I kind of think like if we learn more about different types of algorithms, that's the first step, right? Like the awareness to advocating for ones that would be better.
mm,
Because what if there was, an algorithm with a tool like ChatGPT that always was encouraging us to have a conversation with another human about something, right? Like, what if it was intentionally by design nudging us to just go think or to
mm,
question?
mhm,
These things are possible. You can
mhm.
design them in.
Yes.
And so I think like with that awareness and with questioning, like what is possible with social media? Could it be better? It totally could. And
Yeah.
once we understand that, okay, how do we advocate for it? How do we demand it?
Yeah, so interesting. And what how do you create your chatbots? What program do you use?
So
What's the
I'm
program?
using ChatGPT for this. My goodness, I think I've maybe created 25 different ones. Not every one of them has been a success. It's been a
Oh, yeah.
learning curve for me as well.
Okay.
But in terms of it also being useful to me in terms of doing research, I do not think I have experienced as much deep research as I have in this past year. A few different wormholes that I wanted to go down. There's robot assisted autism therapy. I trained up a bot on a whole bunch of different papers. And then the whole purpose of the bot is to help me make connections between the research and critically to understand where the research disagrees with itself.
Yes. Oh, I wanna talk about that. And we're at an hour, but I really maybe we'll have you back to talk
I'd love
about
that. Yeah.
that, because that is where I think we really intersect. It's so funny. This is like when oftentimes when you're teaching writing, we have this concept that people write down to their meaning. And so one strategy we'll use is say, okay, take that last sentence that you just wrote and repurpose it as the very first sentence. And I feel like you and I just did a conversational version of that where we talked, and then we got down to like, oh, this is where we really, really intersect. Our interests are there. So yeah, let's plan to have you back on to talk about that. I want to hear more. And let's do our peach and pit of the week. Do you have one? This is a tradition Jessica and I have at the end of a show. We like to say, just to help people see we're just humans.
Okay, so should it
And you're
not be
calling me
anything
Dr. Becker, but I'm Kimberly. Please call me Kimberly.
Okay, well, you earned that PhD, so I feel
Well,
like it's
yes,
just,
but
like it's a lot of work.
yeah, thank you.
Oh, my peach for the week, I'm gonna bring it back to my love of my dog. My dog's name is Tashi. It is snowy here in Ottawa, and so she had her first major snow zoomies of the year, and it's beautiful. Like, just, again, I think like you were talking about with different, you know, learning is not necessarily about the product, it's about the process. Like, dogs show us that all the time. She's not trying to, like, win a race.
Mm-mm.
She's just like, "The Zoomy feels good." Like, I am fast, and I'm going to enjoy just it feels good to be fast.
Oh, I love that. Her first snow zoomies. Oh, that's
I have
great.
a video. I'll send you the video later. Yes.
Yes, please do. All dog videos welcome. And cat videos. I'm not a cat. I used to be a cat person.
Same.
Unfortunately, I married somebody who's allergic, and so I've been away, and now I have an allergy. This is a common thing, apparently, but it's very frustrating because at heart, I really love. I think I'm a cat person at heart. But anyway, and a pit.
Oh, pit.
Okay, you think. I'll say my pit of the week so I can end with my peach, and then it'll give you time to think. Um, my pit of I've had kind of a rough week. Technology is kind of a recurrent pit for me because what I love about my job is the thought leadership and getting to do podcasts and writing the research and doing the research and educating about how we can use AI in critical ways. And sometimes I get bogged down in. We just released Moxie 2.0, which is wonderful, great new version of our system, but it has created lots of login issues. And so we've been dealing with customer service, kind of technical glitches and trying to figure out what people are seeing and asking for screenshots. And it's just very tedious. And I've been bogged down in that. So I think that's I'm going to start with my pit so that I can end on a peach. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds that kind of, like, minutia work, like,
Yeah.
annoying. I hear you. I
It's
feel you with that.
annoying and we can't get around it, you know? We have to just accept it.
I think my pit is my wife and I were in, like, such a great groove of healthy eating for weeks and weeks and weeks,
Mm.
and, I love my neighbors. My neighbors are great people. They Neighbors on either side brought us Christmas cookies,
Mm.
and I love sugar. I really have been trying to, like, cut back on sugar, and it was like I had those cookies, and then my bad food demons are alive and well, and they want all the bad food, and
Mhm.
it's so hard to go back to healthy again. So I'm really struggling with, like, getting my gut microbiome to, like, crave bok choy again. My gut microbiome is like, "I forgot sugar exists, and now just can we eat fruit roll-ups 24/7, please?" So, that's my pit.
I mean, yeah, that's just a holiday pit in general.
I was gonna try to, like, just sail right through
I
it and through it, but
I
now it's
know, I know.
completely been shifted.
And my mother-in-law makes the best cut out Christmas cookies.
Okay.
And I love eating her cookies, and I'm not really a baker, but I feel this need to like, okay, if she's really good at it and I have access to her, like I should learn. So I asked her to teach me when she comes to visit for Christmas. And now I'm like, that just means I'm going to go down a whole terrible sugar binge.
I think you're gonna have to, like, if it's not a family secret recipe, that has to be in the show notes because 'cause I'm
Oh,
curious. Because I don't
girl.
know if you've seen, it's Cookie Week on New York Times cooking page, and they've got,
Oh,
like, 8 different recipes. This is, like, if you are into baking, though, because these are all, like, it's gonna take, like, 2 hours.
yes, she's into baking.
Okay, well, she
She's
might.
really good at it.
Okay.
I don't think she'll let me say, like, publish it, but I will say, this one secret ingredient is almond extract, and
Okay.
that makes her cookies stand out. That's what I taste when I taste her cookies, so, yeah. Um, my peach of the week is that I have a morning writing practice, like a physical put pen to paper, kind of a version of the artist's way. I don't
I
know
was
if you're
gonna ask.
familiar
Yep,
with that.
yep.
Yeah. I don't really use that to the extreme, and I don't follow the exact, but um I'd been in a rut with it and just not feeling it, like nothing was coming out, and this morning I had a real break breakthrough just with personal stuff. We have a teenager. Teenagers are hard to deal with. Parenting is hard,
Mhm.
um but yeah, so I had a real kind of revelation this morning, and I saw the benefits of the practice of the sitting down daily and, not always getting something out of it. And kind of to come back to this process product theme, it was, if I hadn't developed that sit down every day and do it, even if it's just junk that comes out, one day something will, and today it was just wonderful. So, um, I don't know if it's a peach of the week or maybe just today, but it feels like for the last few days, I've been on a terrible, I don't know, just in a funk with that. And then today, I reaped all the benefits. So
Ooh, well,
I'm
that's I
happy
feel like
for
I wonder if that's, like, winter solstice energy coming back to you kind of
her.
a thing.
Maybe.
There's Dr. Jessica Lahey, who ironically writes some books about, parenting teens and all of that. She has this great practice where she's trying to get into meditation.
Mhm.
She has this beautiful light up board in her office where so every day she does, like, any meditation, like, doesn't quantify, it doesn't have to be 15 minutes.
Mhm.
She gets to add a light for the year. So the goal is, like, by the end of the year, how many of these little mini lights on her light board are lit up, and I feel like sometimes, like you were saying with incremental change,
Mhm.
having that little physical, like, "You know what I wrote today?" thing.
Mhm. Yeah, it's huge. It really has been transformational for me. I love the light board
Yeah.
because I use an app and, it's gamified. So it's very much like today is your 222nd day of meditation in a row. And this is how many minutes you've accumulated. And my husband just makes fun of me because he's like, why don't you meditate for the sake of meditation and not earning badges in your little app? But yeah, I love this
'Cause I'm a
idea of like,
human being and I
I
need to
love,
be
I
rewarded.
know exactly. Oh, he's kind of a Luddite. But yeah, I love that idea of the light board. I
It's
really
beautiful. I'll
like
try
that.
to she got it, I'll try to find the link because it's, like, it's absolutely stunning. Yes,
Mhm.
it's really nice.
Yay. Well, Trisha, it has just been a total joy to have you on. This has been such a fun conversation, and I have a lot more questions to ask you, but I want to be respectful of your time. So let's plan to do this again. We'll have Jessica here, and yeah, this is just I
Oh,
feel
I
energized.
would love that because yeah, I know that y'all are always sharing about how research is changing, and to be honest, like, that's one of the other things I am so excited about is research is gonna be accessible and, dare I say, more interesting. Like, I think we're gonna have, more compelling research and the means to really engage with it. So some of those experiments have been my absolute favorite thing, to have been doing. So I there's like a small audience of folks who are interested in, like, talking about research getting cooler, and so I'd love, love, love to talk more with
Yeah.
you about
Well,
that.
we're in the audience for sure.
Yes.
For sure. All right, Tricia, thank you so much for being here. And to our listeners, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.